Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Have you ever had to put your plans on hold due to symptoms of generalized myasthenia gravis, or GMG? Like taking that weekend trip, talking with friends, or enjoying a meal. Learn about a treatment option that may help. Visit treatgmg.com to learn more. That's treatgmg.com.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart.
And I'm Gary Bain.
And together we're Pete and Gary's Military History
Podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Gary Bain, and once more I'm joined by Peter Hart, even though I asked him not to come.
Yep, here I am, and I am replete, Gary. Replete.
Oh, we have just finished the firm's Christmas party.
Yeah, and I will never forget that sausage sandwich.
Yeah, you earned that, Pete.
Well, a year's graft.
So what are we doing today?
Well, today we're doing a continuation of our lovely series. I think it's the 4th episode of it, and it's Third Ypres, Battle of Pilckem Ridge.
So did that go on at the same time as Passion Day?
Shut up. 31st of July 1917. You are such a naughty Gary.
Now, although the battle was set to start less than 4 hours after midnight, so that was at 3:50 in the morning, for the waiting men, these hours and minutes seemed interminable.
Yeah, it's the longest night, to be a bit cliched.
And it dragged on.
It did.
Minute by minute, the designated 0 hour of 03:50 drew nearer. The crucial moment which would mark the formal opening of the offensive.
It's not funny, really, is it? Because you can imagine in the assembly and jumping off trenches, they're crowded, Gary, with men and their equipment. And, of course, they're very vulnerable to any German counter-bombardment or anything that's going on.
Now, throughout the salient, final briefings were being conducted at every level of command. And this is Lieutenant Colonel James Jack of the 2nd West Yorkshire Regiment. And you're going to tell us what he said.
At 2:30 a.m. on the 31st, I personally reported to the brigade headquarters that the 2nd West Yorks were ready to attack. The other 3 battalion commanders of the 23rd Brigade and the commanders of attached units made similar reports. General Grogan asked me in my turn, "And you, Colonel Jack, do you understand your orders?" I replied, "Yes, sir." He then read out the latest news from divisional front, saying in conclusion, "That's all, gentlemen. Thank you and good luck." We reciprocated the good wishes, saluted and returned to our units.
Did the General have a sore throat?
That's my COVID.
Now, last-minute details were checked and double-checked to ensure that everyone knew exactly what they were to do when the moment came.
Yeah, now it was a horrible, dark, miserable night, and even though it's the middle of summer, and the weather seems to sour to... It almost matches the mood of the men, the dismal, miserable mood of the men. And it begins to drizzle, just like the drizzle I've just walked 6 miles to get to your house to. And facing the darkest of dawns, the sun seemed unwilling to cast its light on the hellish prospect that beckoned. There's a lot of purple prose in this. You can tell this was written when I was young. Well,
And this is CSM John Handley of the 1st 6th King's Liverpool Regiment.
Scouser.
It began to drizzle, increased to a fine wetting rain,
Scouser.
when next morning at 3:45, which was 0 hour, we went over the top. It was planned for the attack to start at the first light of dawn, but under a nimbus cloud, with the rain pouring down, it was indeed as black as night. The tense, ominous hours spent during the night waiting for 0 hour caused some men to pray, others to curse, and some to think and talk of home and loved ones. But I had a splitting headache, which, with the fear, put me to sleep. Awakened for the final stand to, one is oppressed by the deathly silence that always precedes a battle. The calm before the storm. Even the enemy seemed to be saving his ammunition for the imminent cataclysm.
Blimey. Now, in many units, they were issued with the rum ration. It's traditional for men about to risk their lives for king and country. And we want to make one thing clear. What is the thing we want to make clear?
Well, it's most emphatically, it wasn't done to make them drunk. It was intended to be just enough of a panacea to relax their inhibitions a little for the trials that lay ahead of them and to ease their way from relative passivity into violent action.
Yeah, drink has the same effect on you, doesn't it?
Now, this is a good old-fashioned English name. This is Lieutenant Ulrich Burke of the 2nd Battalion Devonshire Regiment.
They had their own rum ration. The quartermaster was always good on these occasions. It was practically a double because he'd filched or watered down or done something with it to let us have some more. Then you gave the men your last orders. They had brief ladders, 2 bits of wood nailed together with 3 or 4 cross pieces to help them get out. 5 minutes before the actual time of going over, that's the worst time for the troops. That's when their feelings might break. And you can imagine, this is what made you interested in the Great War in the first place, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Now, the officers carefully synchronised watches, ticked the seconds away in perfect uniformity, gathering the whole army into a bond of shared experience.
Blimey. And at last, it can't be, the whole moment, it can't be delayed anymore. The time has come. And this is the ultimate, this is what interested you about the whole thing. It's the ultimate test of a man's courage and his character. And it's the time is there for each and every one of them. And you're going to say what Captain Thomas Outram of the 1st 5th King's Own Royal Lancaster Regiment said.
Just as the luminous dial of one's wristwatch indicated 3:50, a long, jagged line of flame burst from the ground some way in front of us, followed by a hollow roar, which was followed by a tremendous crack as our field guns opened fire and the whistling of the barrage of shells as it passed over our heads. I blew my whistle and shouted. Men struggled stiffly to their feet, and we advanced until the shells were bursting only 50 yards in front of us. Wow.
Yeah, that's safer there than letting them giving them time to get out, get the machine guns going. Now that bombardment, it's sort of stupendous. It's awesome. It's reassuring, and of course it's terrifying in part. And it's all things in one, isn't it? And it's more powerful than anyone could imagine, and no one would ever want to experience it. No one's sane anyway. Now, I like this next quote because it's, my long-standing principle that I don't like poetry, but I quite like poets, and they write excellent prose. And this is how Lieutenant Edmund Blunden of the 11th Royal Sussex Regiment, he tried to come to terms with that awful experience and the barrage skimming over his head. And he said this. And it's a bit florid, but it's good fun. A florid Amazon of steel flowed roaring immensely fast over our heads, and the machine gun bullets made a pattern of sharper purpose and maniac language against that diluvian rush. Flaring lights, small ones, great ones, flew up and went spinning sideways in the cloud of night. One's eyes seemed not quick enough. One heard nothing from one's shouting neighbour, and only by the quality of the noise and flame did I know that the German shells crashing among the tree stumps were big ones and practically on top of us. Not suppressed all the German barrage then.
Faced with this overwhelming experience, some soldiers just could not cope, and the facade of their manhood, so carefully constructed and cherished all their adult lives, fell to pieces in front of their more stoic comrades. And this is Private Ivor Watkins of 15th Battalion Welsh Regiment. As the barrage opened, it was terrific. One person, he broke down. He started screeching like a pig. You've heard a pig screeching? Well, he screeched like a stuck pig. He was sent back. It was no fault of his. It wasn't cowardice. We knew the fellow. He wasn't the type of boy who played football or roughed it up a bit. He was temperamental, a brilliant pianist, and in fact he shouldn't have been in the army at all. His nerves just went. I suppose we had faith in those people who were leading us, otherwise it would have been scaring. Our training made us have faith in whoever was leading us, our officer, section leader, sergeant or a corporal.
Now, the next quote I particularly remember, I remember putting this in the book, and it always struck me as a very emotional one. It just sums up how men react and how the relationships they've made become all important. And this is Private Alfred Warsop of the 1st Sherwood Foresters. I would do a daft accent, but it's not appropriate, I think, for these things. So, we scrambled out of the trench, and everyone there must have been dumbfounded. We knew we'd been sending up guns, and more guns, until they must have been standing wheel to wheel, and the Germans must have been doing the same. We knew they would all fire at once and concentrate on a line so many yards in front. It was still dark, but then suddenly it was illuminated by a line of bursting shells. But what was astonishing still was that we must have all been quite deafened by the noise. I looked at Herbert, that's his friend. I could see his lips move. I shouted, but I couldn't hear myself at all. I wanted to tell him that we would keep together, so I grabbed his hand, and we went over the top together as we'd gone to Sunday school, hand in hand. And I find that quite touching.
But it's very moving, isn't it?
Yeah. And they're going into a sort of modern-day valley of death, if you like, if you want to make it daft, but I think it's great.
The objectives along the line had been simply delineated.
Ooh.
The German first lines and immediate support works were designated the blue line.
Now, well, there's German second line, that was the black line on the maps, and behind that lay the next German system of trenches and linked pillboxes, which was known collectively as the green line. It reminds me of your
line. It's tube map.
Tube map, yeah.
Now, on the left of the line, 2 divisions of the French First Army moved forward with consummate ease, buoyed by the sheer power of their artillery support. How come I'm getting all the difficult words?
I don't know. It's just bad luck.
Consummate.
You dealt with it consummately.
Thank you. Now, pushing aside the almost non-existent opposition, they moved beyond their final objectives, even reaching the outskirts of the village of Bixshooter.
That's right. Now, on their right flank, the French right flank, lay the British 14th Corps, and that was set to attack on either side of the Ypres-Stadon Railway, deploying the Guards Division, the 38th Welsh Division. And their task had been considerably simplified by the Guards' success in crossing the Yser Canal just a few days before. In front of the 14th Corps was the low rise of the Pilckem Ridge, and beyond it the Steenbeck Valley. Now that low rise, I remember me and Nigel had written this book, then we went to Ypres. We were going to St Julian and we didn't notice Pilckem Ridge, and there's nothing to it. We've been in the car going over it, you barely notice it, do you?
But it is higher ground.
It is, and the view from there is important.
Now, at first, the Guards and Welshmen met little effective resistance as they advanced to their black line objectives along the top of Pilckem Ridge. And this is Captain Arthur Gibbs of the 1st Battalion Welsh Guards. I'm afraid we have not killed many Huns, as they ran too fast for us long before we came up to them. With the exception of the short check at Colonel's Farm, the French went through each objective side by side with our troops, and further to the left went considerably beyond their last objective. The artillery support throughout the battle was magnificent. The creeping barrage was a uniform and unmistakable line behind which our troops advanced at a distance of only 50 yards. The counter-battery work was so effective that the Germans never put down an effective barrage.
So it's quite interesting because people always think that it's all failure at Ypres, but this is quite successful on the left. Now, the support brigades move up behind that first wave and they continue the assault, but gradually it gets more and more difficult. Why would that be?
Well, the German resistance gradually stiffened with heavy machine gun fire from blockhouses and pillboxes sighted on the Ypres-Stade Railway and around Langemarck village. Casualties begin to mount.
And this is Lieutenant Lord Gage of the 2nd Coldstream Guards. I suddenly felt a tremendous blow in the chest. Then I fell to the ground, nearly unconscious, but I could think enough to realise that I had been wounded. How badly I didn't know, but I remember wondering whether this was it. Was I dead or not? If so, what was going to happen? Then the blackness gave way to light, apparently of this earth. Glory be to God, I was alive. But was I? For the next object of definition to crystallise out was my red-headed company runner, and he was saying with the utmost clarity, "Gawd, sir, you're a goner! It's plumb through your bloody heart!" By this time I was getting a little mixed up and feeling not a little aggrieved that he should put things quite as he did. Now, I like that because, of course, we know he didn't die because he left an account. Yeah. But you can imagine when you're
He
shot
didn't know at the time whether he was going to survive.
Yeah, and you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you can be, oh, I'm all right. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not.
Well, he was taken back to the dressing station, wasn't he? And his wounds were tended.
And, he lived to write his account, yeah.
Now, behind him, the 14th Corps had been broadly successful in securing the line of the Stebnicki, an advance of some 3,000 yards. That was no mean achievement, that.
Nah, that's pretty good. Now, to their right, the 18th Corps, which is composed of the 51st and 39th Divisions, they were attacking across the Pilckem Ridge, passing through what remained of a series of woods to reach the Steenbeck and capture the village of St. Julian. And they were supported by several tanks from the 1st Tank Brigade. Now, we've got one account, which I think is an oral history that was taken in the late 70s, and this is of a tank commanded by Lieutenant Horace Burks, who's moving towards Mousetrap Farm, and you're going to be Lieutenant Horace Burks. He's in D Battalion Tank.
The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus in present and select states. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Do you work out? You should be taking creatine. Creatine powers your muscles, boosts your brain, and supports recovery. Harlow combines creatine with electrolytes and collagen, all in one simple scoop. Get yours at drinkharlow.com. Drinkharlow.com.
Have you ever had to put your plans on hold due to symptoms of generalized myasthenia gravis, or GMG? Like taking that weekend trip, talking with friends, or enjoying a meal. Learn about a treatment option that may help. Visit treatgmg.com to learn more. That's treatgmg.com.
Cool.
We had to close down because we were within very comfortable machine gun range, and once we were shut down, we were completely isolated from the world. We had no means of communication at all. The thing got hotter and hotter and hotter. The only ventilation was concerned with the engine and not with the crew. You could only see forward through a little slit in the front visor, and if you wanted to see out of the side, you looked through steel periscopes, which gave you a sort of translucent outside light, all distorted. The tank inside was just steeped in Stygian gloom. Gloomy, hot and steamy. My particular tank never went until the engine had boiled. Once it had boiled, you kept it boiling, and it was jolly good. The noise inside was such that you could hear nothing outside, nothing at all, and people made little gestures to you, rude or otherwise. That was all you could do, your sole means of communicating. When this barrage came down, you could distinguish that quite easily, because any shell bursting within a few yards of the tank, you got tremendous back pressure, and you felt it all the way through. In fact, a shell bursting between the horns of the tank seemed to lift it up in the air, And then the machine guns started. They were quite easy to discern because they were just like peas in a tin can, rattling away.
Now, tanks, you may have been a bit safer than out in the open. I'm not sure you were because they were a target for artillery, but you've got almost no visibility, almost none. The noise is unbelievably deafening, and they're advancing. There's no landmarks. It must have been absolutely awful and confusing for the tanks as they crawled forward. And this is, the emotion got to me there. And this is Sergeant Joseph Olnert of G Battalion Tank Corps, and he says, "It began to rain as we reached the first German trenches. They did not present any great difficulty, although slimy with mud and covered with considerable quantities of partly destroyed barbed wire. Tanks were facing in all directions, and already some were in trouble. I suddenly became aware of someone standing in front of my tank and beckoning me with his walking stick. It was Captain Powell, my section commander. He was trying to help me to find a passage between the shell holes, which were filled with water and mud. He was almost up to his knees in mud, and he was probably finding it more difficult to get about than I was. After helping us for some 20 minutes, he signalled to me to stop and got into the tank by the side door and sat next to me at the end of the engine. 'That's too bloody hot out there for me, Sergeant,' he said. We continued on our journey, and each time we went or passed through a shell hole, the muddy water came sluicing into the floor of the tank, making everything a filthy mess."
Where was Captain Powell from?
Yeah.
Checking.
I'm Derbyshire, but I'm not sure about that.
Now, things got worse as they approached the River Stebnicki, which they had been warned was about 10 feet across. And you're going to tell us once more what Sergeant Joseph Olnert says.
"I found that the banks were non-existent and the stream had spread itself to be about 40 feet wide. I had grave doubts as to whether I should be able to get over that. I had a try. In fact, I had 3 tries at the spot where I could get over, but with no success. I was, however, fortunate in being able to back out and decided to look for a crossing a little further upstream in the village of St. Julian." Ooh.
Now, after this diversion, Gravedigger managed to cross the Steenbeek. That's the name of the tank.
Yeah, sorry.
Managed to cross the Steenbeek and headed for their rather appropriate objective of Springfield Cemetery on the Langemark-Winnipeg Road.
It's like rather dark humour you were deploying there, Gary.
No, that's the best type of humour, I find. Now, so far, despite all their efforts, they'd made little concrete. I can't say the word concrete.
It's difficult.
So far, despite all their efforts, they'd made little concrete contribution to the battle.
Very good, Gary.
That was your fault.
Sorry.
That was your fault.
Now, the neighbouring 19th Corps also suffered mixed fortunes in its attack across the Pilckem Ridge, and they were headed towards the German defensive positions of the Gellivelt-Langemark line in front of London Ridge, which reached out from the main Passchendaele-Gellivelt Ridge. It's a sort of spur coming off it, isn't it? Initially, at least the 55th and 15th Divisions were tremendously successful. Now, Company Sergeant Major John Handley, we've had him before, went over the top with the 1st 6th King's Liverpool Regiment, and they're attacking Camel Trench, and then they were to move from there onto Jasper Farm Pillbox, and that marks the blue line objectives. That's the first objective, yeah.
And this is Company Sergeant Major John Handley of the 1st 6th King's Liverpool Regiment, and he says this: "As I plunged into the mud, several rifle shots flashed and cracked from the enemy trench just in front of me. The bullets whizzed past my head, and incidentally, for weeks afterwards, I was partially deaf in the left ear. My rifle was useless, choked with mud. Pulling out a hand grenade, I released the lever and lobbed it as near as I could to the area from which the shots came. Bobbing up to see the explosion, I saw several heads silhouetted against the flash. I'd aimed well. At that moment, one of our Lewis gun teams came up, and I led them into the German trench where, in the half-light of dawn, we only found one badly wounded Hun."
Now, to the left of the 1st 5th King's Own Royal Lancasters, that's another battalion in the same brigade unit, they'd also reached the German front lines, and they plunge onwards. And this is Captain Thomas Outram again, as I said, 1st 5th King's Own Royal Lancaster Regiment. What a long name that is. In the trench,
That'll be me then.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry, I wanted it to be me.
In the trench just in front of us, a number of Germans could be seen in the faint light. They appeared to be throwing things at us. There was a sound of bursting hand grenades. Then the Germans got out of the trench and ran back. As quickly as I could, I got my men over the trench and moved forward again, leaving the so-called mopping up parties to deal with any of the enemy who might be skulking in their dugouts. I could only see about 20 yards in either direction, so I hoped that the platoon commanders on my right and left were doing likewise. We resumed the advance. To the best of my knowledge, it was only as we were getting near the reserve line that constituted our final objective that we ran into the curtain of machine gun fire that caused us such heavy casualties. I saw my runner, who was close beside me, fall, apparently lifeless without a sound, and at the same moment I received a blow where my left leg joined my body. That knocked me over as though a horse had kicked me. Bullets were flicking the earth all around me. The parapet of the trench at which our advance was to terminate was about 5 yards in front of me. I got up and made a dash for it. As I was crossing the parapet, another bullet hit me, piercing my right knee joint.
I mean, that's him out of it then, isn't it? Meanwhile, John Handley, remember our company Sergeant Major John Handley of the 1st 6th Kings Liverpool, he'd also moved forward towards his next objective. But the ground was absolutely torn apart and there was no landmarks that you could see. And he wasn't really sure where he was going. And you're going to tell us what you're working hard.
I am. You're going to work hard soon.
Oh, right. All right. Anyway, what does John Handley say?
It was a case of plodding through shell holes and round small earth mounds. Skirting one mound, I came into full view of Jasper Farm. It was a huge mound of bare concrete with gun slits, a pillbox. Stark and bare, it looked grotesque, our bombardments having blown away the earth which concealed it. I was surprised, and even more so, when I saw 6 Germans lined up in front of it. They immediately put their hands up in surrender. Pointing my useless rifle at them, I released an arm to wave them forward in the direction of the British lines. On reaching the old German front line, I handed them over to one of my sergeants for escorting back to captivity.
Now, the 55th and 15th Divisions were both successful in exploiting their initial successes, and they managed to advance to their Green Line objectives, approaching the London Ridge. That's that spur off the main ridge we mentioned earlier. Now, consolidation, well, would that be important, do you think, Gary?
Absolutely, and CSM John Handley immediately recognised the onerous responsibilities that had fallen to him in the absence of any surviving officers. And he says this: "As no officers could be found, I set about locating the troops of the company. I reorganised them and set them to work on the necessary duties, one of which was to improve and reverse the old German trenches we had captured. This done, I set to work, after getting the necessary information from sergeants and corporals, to prepare the various reports which were overdue at Battalion HQ, such as known killed and wounded, the number of active men, amount and conditions of weapons and ammunition, and that we had occupied our objectives, etc. Having completed the reports, I was about to sign it when a young second lieutenant, newly out of England, arrived in a demented state. 'Look what I've got,' he said to me, showing a collection of German helmets and other booty. Obviously, he was crackers. Should I get him to sign the report? I wondered. If I signed, the honours would be mine, but on the other hand, he would have to explain his absence and neglect of duty with possibly serious consequences. Deciding on the more honourable, unselfish actions for his protection, I said, 'Never mind those, sign this report for HQ.' He signed without reading and knowing what he was authorising. After the battle, when the honours were allotted, he got the Military Cross, and my reward was the Croix de Guerre, which was a Belgian award."
Is it? No, I thought it was French, but it might be the same name for the whatever. Now, on the southern flank of the 5th Army, the 2nd Corps was entrusted with the attack on the Gellivelt Plateau, and that ranges from the West Hoke Ridge through to Shrewsbury Forest. It's the crucial high ground, isn't it? It is. Haig had emphasised to Gough it must be captured, or the success of the whole of that day's offensive would be endangered. Now, Gough and his 2nd Corps commander, who was that? Come on.
Lieutenant General Claude Jacob.
Now, they were both aware of the difficulties that faced them, and both of them seem to have been overly optimistic, would you say? Or would you say sanguine? You are more sophisticated than me, aren't you?
Well, I was just saying whether or not you could say sanguine.
I can. Now, they were more... So there was a pregnant pause there while we both considered the fact
we were both patting ourselves on the back.
Yeah, we were. They were both overly optimistic in their assessment of the situation, given the phenomenal strength of the German defences on the Gallivelt Plateau. Now, who's put into this? Well, it's the 8th, 30th, 18th and 24th Divisions. And it's a very difficult task.
Now, the 8th Division directly faced the West Hook Ridge. On the right of the divisional front, the 1st Worcestershire's advanced towards Chateau Wood, and this is Major Cecil Barton of the 1st Worcestershire Regiment.
We are moving slowly towards that reddish line. You mean the bombardment in front of him. I suddenly see some wicker revetments sticking up amidst the jumbled earth. It's the Boche front line. We're almost in our own barrage now. A shell burst just in front of me. I don't know whether it was one of Fritz's, but probably one of ours. I expect at any moment to see a Boche aiming at me and keep wondering if I should be quicker than he. For some reason or other, the men are all cheering off to the left. You can just imagine, what's that cheering?
Now, as they reached the German front line, the British troops made their charge. And once more, you're going to tell us what Lieutenant Ulrich Burke of the 2nd Devonshire Regiment
We've had him
said.
before, yeah. He said this: "It was only when you get to within 20 yards of the trench that you said, 'Charge!' They then brought their rifles facing the enemy and charged into the trench, killing and bayoneting. It only lasted a few seconds. If there weren't many troops about, you knew there must be more, so you threw bombs down into the dugouts. That wasn't so much to kill them, it was to keep them down there."
Now, the 8th Division made steady progress despite the difficult terrain, and Lieutenant Ulrich Burke goes on.
"When you get to the trench, up to the last moment, you're seeing if your men are there and if you've got any left. Then you jump into the trench. This German put his bayonet up, and I'm afraid I caught it in the right shoulder, right across my back and just missing my spine. I was impaled on this. My only fear was that he'd pressed the trigger, which would have made a hell of a mess. My sergeant, who was near me, saw me. He came in close, shot the fellow, and then hoisted me with the help of another man off the bayonet, because I was on top of the German. He was dead, and it wasn't pleasant. A bayonet wound hurts directly it goes in, and the withdrawal is more anguish than the putting in, because the putting in is instantaneous. If you get hit by a bullet or bomb splinter, it's so hot that it cauterises the wound, and you don't feel anything for a minute or two. That's interesting perspective."
As a support brigade came up to reinforce the attack reaching West Hook village, that was the objective on the Black Line, further progress was impossible because of heavy machine gun fire emanating from the Hannabeek Valley in front of them and Glencorse Wood on their right flank.
Now, alongside the 8th Division was the 30th Division, and they have a pretty torrid time, Gary. and it had been generally recognised that they faced the most difficult task of all. They were confronted by heavy German shell fire when they started. Their advantage, just a mess of shell holes, mud, barbed wire, devastated woodland, sanctuary wood, and they lost touch with a creeping barrage that can be fatal, which just progresses ahead of them, and that allows the German defending troops to emerge in good time to slaughter them, and although they managed to just about get the blue line objectives, that's the Piccadilly line, they were held up by severe machine gun fire coming from Stirling Castle, and there's a pillbox complex there. Eventually, Stirling Castle and Bodmin Copse nearby were captured, but only after the troops intended for the assault on Glencorse Wood and Inverness Wood had been thoroughly entangled in the bitter fighting to get these earlier objectives.
Now, the situation was thoroughly confused and made worse when the German barrage fell right across Sanctuary and Chateau Woods and cut all communications. It was obvious that the British counter-battery fire in this sector had completely failed to suppress the massed German batteries concealed on the reverse slopes and valleys of Gallivelt Plateau.
Oh dear.
Now, as they passed the German frontline positions, they found the corpses of their enemies. And this is Corporal Edmund Williams of the 19th King's Liverpool Regiment, and you're going to tell us what he says.
He's a Scouser. I remember he was interviewed by a chap called Chris Thistlethwaite. Cracking interview. And he said this: "There were two dead Germans, one lying on his face and the other leaning against a wall. Wall of a trench, he means. He was a handsome bloke. He reminded me of my father a bit. A shell had dissected him neatly. nicely rather. It had taken the whole of the front off his chest down to his stomach, neatly cut aside and laid apart as if it was in an anatomy school. I said, "What a fantastic exhibition of anatomy!" It sounds heartless, but then you're in an area of suppressed emotion, so your mind tends to take over.
So would you be able to find that interview on the museum website?
Yep. If you type in Edmund Williams and Imperial War Museum, it will come out.
Excellent. Now, the 18th Division were due to leapfrog over the 30th Division once it had captured Glencorse Wood and push across the Gellivelt Plateau. Now, it was immediately apparent that something had gone horribly wrong as they came under heavy fire moving through Sanctuary Wood. They soon discovered that the supporting tanks were also having severe problems, and this is Signaller Sidney Fuller of the 8th Suffolk Regiment.
6 of our tanks got stuck in the boggy ground immediately behind us. 4 of them managed to struggle out again, but 2 sank so deeply in the mud that they were left. 4 of these tanks were named Brian Boru, Boomerang, Bentley and Britannia. Is there a theme going on there, do you think?
Yes. Something to do with the Australians.
No, it's B.
Oh.
2 of them got up the bank onto the road, and the enemy's bullets struck them by scores, but of course had no effect. When the tanks had gone a little way up the road towards Inverness Copse, they were one after the other knocked out by small shells. Yeah, that's the trouble with tanks. They're vulnerable to artillery.
Now, of the 48 tanks of the 2nd Tank Brigade deployed in front of the 2nd Corps, only 19 got through the mud and into action, and all but 1 became casualties.
Blimey.
The 17 tanks lying derelict by Clapham Junction earned it the sobriquet...
Gary.
The Tank Graveyard.
Nickname?
The Tank Graveyard. They'd achieved little to help the infantry.
Now, in the plan for the 2nd Corps attack, the 24th Division had been intended to form a defensive flank on the right of the advance. But the left-hand brigades of the division, after passing through Shrewsbury Forest, found themselves dragged down by the same problems as the 30th Division. Difficult terrain and a vigorous German opposition, it caused them to become detached from their creeping barrage, and they too stalled in front of the German second line across the Gellivelt Plateau. The combined efforts of 30th and 18th Division failed against the rock of the Gellivelt Plateau German defences.
South of the main thrust being carried out by Fifth Army's Plumer's Second Army was to make a simultaneous advance across... I'm going to try that again. South of the main thrust...
I'll tell you what your problem is. There's a comma missing.
There's a comma missing. South of the main thrust being carried out by the Fifth Army...
Comma.
Plumer's Second Army was to make a simultaneous advance across the right-hand edge of Gellivelt Plateau, pivoting on the new position won at Messines 6 weeks earlier. I'm sure you can edit that small error out, but you probably won't.
Oh, won't. I'd like to see you struggling. Now, they made some progress, but in the light of the failure of the 2nd Corps attack on Gellivelt Plateau, they really only have to consolidate where they are. There's not much to do.
The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Do you work out? You should be taking creatine. Creatine powers your muscles, boosts your brain, and supports recovery. Harlow combines creatine with electrolytes and collagen, all in one simple scoop. Get yours at drinkharlow.com. drinkharlow.com.
It was recognised as crucially important to get the relatively short-range field artillery of 18-pounder guns and 4.5-inch howitzers forward as soon as possible if the artillery support was not to begin to falter as the infantry advanced beyond their effective range.
Now, this is a general point we're making here. This is about the whole of the advance. They need to get, but when they make a decent advance, as they had on the left, they need to get the guns forward, or their field artillery are out of range, aren't they? What did they do, Gary? What did they do?
Arrangements had been made for parties of gunners to move up with the infantry, ready to prepare advanced gun positions for the guns to occupy immediately they could be brought forward. Now, this was easier said than done in the glutinous mud.
Glutinous.
Now, despite the advances that had been made, in many places the Germans still overlooked the new British lines and hence the new gun positions.
Now, the gunners, they do their best, but it's physically impossible to duplicate the destructive power of their morning bombardment as the infantry move forward across Pilckem Ridge, out of touch, out of sight, and many batteries out of range. It means that the power of the British guns is diluted.
Along the attack frontage, the thinly held German forward defensive zone had been taken, but the German counter-attack policy was based firmly on the premise that as the British infantry moved further forward, so their attack formations and artillery support weakened, just as the correspondingly German strength would grow as their specially designated counter-attack division moved up from their reserve billets.
Yeah, positioned behind the Broodsinder Passchendaele Ridge were these German counterattack divisions. And, of course, they're almost unscathed during the British bombardments. And so their counterattack is directed squarely at the advanced brigades of the 39th, 55th, 15th and 8th Divisions. They're the ones in the left and centre that are doing really quite well.
These formations were subject to the inevitable casualties suffered even in success, increasing physical and mental fatigue and a general breakdown in communications with both their artillery support and divisional commanders.
Now, at 2 p.m, or 1400 as we would now say, a pulverising German barrage fell upon the British line between Ypres, the Ypres Rulers Railway and the village of St. Julian. And that is just before a serious German counterattack, directed initially on the left against 39th Division, which had moved forward from St. Julian into positions on either side of the St. Julian-Polkapal Road. Ooh.
Now, it's funny, because we've been there recently, I can see all these places in my mind's eye as we're talking about them.
We're going back there at the end of January, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
So just 2 or 3 weeks when this comes out.
The tired troops were unable to hold on to all their hard-won gains, being forced back to a line along the Steenbeek, which entailed losing control of the battered remnants of St. Julian.
Now, the German success there, that in turn, and this is what happens, isn't it, exposes the left flank of the 55th Division, who in turn were then subject to more counterattacks. The men fight hard, don't they? But the Germans, they've got artillery superiority, they've got greater numbers, and bit by bit the British are forced back. And you're going to tell us what good old Company Sergeant Major John Handley of the 1st 6th King's Liverpool Regiment said.
The day wore on with the enemy raining explosive shells on us, in a leaden sky and in a steady downpour. The mud was appalling, the shell holes and trenches filled with water, adding discomfort to continuous danger. Fortunately, I was able to enjoy the comparative comfort of the concrete pillbox, but whenever an alarm of enemy counterattack was signalled, we had to dash out and man a newly dug support trench, which was nearly waist deep in water. It was like jumping into a bath, a very cold bath, in which we had to stand for hours.
Now, as the day wore on, the 15th Division are also facing increasing German counterattacks, and while they're in their positions on London Bridge. London Bridge? That's in America, isn't it?
In such chaos and confusion, the calm, controlled decisions of tactical exercises were almost impossible. It was almost impossible to take firm, clear-cut decisions without any clear intelligence as to one's own position or reserves, no idea of the location of the enemy, and no means of communication on a battlefield torn with screaming shell fragments and nerve-jarring detonations.
Ooh. Now, on West Hoke Ridge, the situation, that's just to the left of the Kellervelt Plateau. The 8th Division, their support brigade had been consumed up in the fight to take the Green Line objectives. And the battalions that had made the initial assault were consequently required to hold their gains at all costs against the vigorous counterattacks that burst upon them. And this is what Private Alfred Alsop of the 1st Sherwood Foresters...
Alfred Warsop.
Warsop. I said Worsop. Worsop.
You said Alsop.
Oh, did I?
We'll start again, Pete. You can edit that bit out as well.
I'm not going to. I own my mistakes, Gary.
You're going to tell us what Private Alfred Warsop of the 1st Sherwood Foresters said.
The shout went up. They're coming. The Jerrys are coming. There was only one thing to do. If we stayed in the trench, we should have been shot from above like rats in a trap. So I shouted, all out and on the back. 2 stayed in and 5 of us were on the back, one with a machine gun on the extreme left. He'd only fired 5 rounds when he was shot and killed. And then the next, then the one on my left. In theory, it would be my turn next, but I thought I saw 2 men behind some bushes 25 yards in front. By now I was thoroughly frightened, but I did draw my rifle, check my sights 25 yards, and very carefully squeeze the trigger. First one, and then the other indistinct figure. By this time the man on my right was hit, and how I escaped I shall never know, unless I got them before they got me. A whistle blew on the German side, and the men, quite a lot of them, made their way back to their own lines. A voice at the back said, "Come down, Warsop, you can't do any more." It was a captain, and a few more that had come up from the right. We couldn't understand why they'd called off the counterattack, since they'd taken their strong point on the right and worked round the back of us. They couldn't have realised how thin our line was there.
Eventually, the remnants of the 8th Division could hold on no longer, and they retired from the German second line, situated on the reverse slope, back up onto the crest of West Hook Ridge, and in the process also relinquished West Hook village itself. Now, as night fell, all along the precarious front line, miserable men skulked in shell holes and pillboxes, cursing the omnipresent rain that soaked them to the skin.
Do you think they complained?
They would have observed a lot, I think. Now, this is Signaller Gerald Dennis of the 21st King's Royal Rifle Corps, and he said this: "What a night it was. Did I get any sleep? I don't remember. The bed and the pillows were soft enough and very watery, as I tried to find comfort in a shell hole. Luckier ones managed to find a piece of trench to rest in. I used my spade frequently to throw water out of the bottom. I had become accustomed to manage on a few hours' sleep, and no doubt had a few naps. Like the others, I had eaten sparingly, a little bread and a thin slice of bully. Water was precious, and I drank but a little. The crawl out to an unoccupied shell hole to use a latrine was a frightening effort, not to be made unless absolutely necessary."
Oh, sounds like you at night, Gary.
Does. I have to empty the bed with a spade sometimes. Now, the line held, although the icing on the cake, the advances of 55th and 15th Divisions were lost.
Oh.
The 5th Army had still made a considerable step forward by the prevailing standards of the Western Front.
Now, on the left, let's look at this. On the left, two full German defensive lines have been taken. That's quite an achievement. And the Germans have been deprived of their uninhibited observation of the whole Ypres salient from the Pilckem and Bellevard ridges. Right. Now, even Gary, on the Gellivelt Plateau, some progress had been made. Not enough. The German first line's overrun and some key observation posts have been captured. That's not enough, is it? But it's a start. 9 German divisions have been smashed up, and although precise German casualties are difficult to establish, most seem to agree they suffered losses of about 30,000, of which some 6,000 were prisoners of war, and they captured 25 guns. Yep. Not bad.
Now, when compared to the first day of the Battle of the Somme, 31st of July 1917, subsequently termed the Battle of Pilckem Ridge, was undoubtedly a great success. But as the opening of the Somme had been an unparalleled military disaster, such a comparison can only ever be a bit of consolation.
Now, the success of a military operation, that can only really, Gary, be assessed with regard to the tactical and strategic objectives which it's intended to achieve before it's actually commenced. So what would you say? What have the objectives been?
Well, the objectives of the blue and black lines may well have been achieved on the opening day of Third Ypres.
So that's a Piccadilly and Northern line.
But the green and red lines, that's the district line and the central line, remained in German hands. I should say at this point, they weren't called Piccadilly line, central line, district line. We're just making that up.
Oh, yeah.
I hope that you'll be editing all of this out. Now,
to be absolutely honest, Gary, we'd have to start again.
Now, in retrospect, the overly ambitious advance left the troops vulnerable to strong German counterattacks made by divisions protected from the British bombardment.
Yeah, so what we're saying is they shouldn't have tried to get so far.
No, the failure to concentrate sufficient resources for the attack on the fearsome Gellivelt Plateau had meant that there was that not even the Black Line had been taken, leaving the considerable successes made in the left and in the centre exposed to an uncomfortable salient.
You're quite right, Gary. You got there in the end.
Could you use in anymore instead of on?
So basically, they're in a salient. They can be attacked from either side.
Well, three sides.
Three
usually.
sides, yeah. And so, 1st of August, what would you say? What would you say the situation?
I'm not
was?
saying anything.
Oh, you're sulking. And look, I'll say there's no commas here either. Only half the job that they wanted and required, they expected and required, had been done. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but in achieving this, the assaulting divisions had already suffered severe casualties that considerably reduced their military effectiveness, especially in the short term.
Now, ahead of them, the Passchendaele to Staden Ridge, that's still inviolate, isn't it? And any idea of an attack on rulers in the near future, taking rulers, it's a daydream, isn't it?
Yeah, the sheer strength of the German defences made it inevitable that any further progress would be slow and painful.
Now, the human cost, and this is why we've not been doing silly accents, because it's the human cost of this very limited achievement by the British is staggering, isn't it?
The Fifth Army had suffered 27,001 casualties, killed, wounded and missing, and the Second Army some 4,489, whilst the relatively fortunate French had lost under 2,000.
So that's over 33,000 casualties.
Maths repeating, Gary.
But what you get from this is that you've got battalions, full of strong, fit men. They've been through their training. They've had previous battle experience. They've been reduced to just husks of what they were, and even the strongest men couldn't help but be moved by the scale of the losses within their battalions and the suffering that was just etched on the faces of those who'd survived. And this is a very sad quote, but typical from Company Sergeant Major John Hanley of the 1st 6th King's Liverpool Regiment.
On marching back behind Ypres, Brigadier Duncan, that hard, stern soldier whom we feared, stood by the roadside taking the salute. "March to attention!" rang out the order. Then, "Eyes right!" And as we turned our heads, we saw him standing erect, his right arm raised in the salute, and tears streaming down his face. It was indeed a sorry brigade he saluted that day, the remnants of battle, for barely a quarter of his men returned.
And the problem is, Gary, that it had only just begun, the torture of the British Army on the Somme, torture of the German Army and the French Army as well, but in particular the British Army.
Cheers, Pete.
Cheers, Gary. Thanks for listening to the show.
Blah, blah, blah.
If you'd like to support us,
blah,
you can now buy us a coffee.
blah,
Visit www.buymeacoffee.com/PGMH.
Or visit www.blah.
And we'd be jolly grateful.
Cheers.
The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
I love working out, but I used to spend over $140 a month on separate supplements. Then I discovered Harlow. Harlow is a 3-in-1 performance drink mix with electrolytes, collagen, and creatine. It helps me stay hydrated, perform better, and recover faster, whether you're hitting the gym or just getting started. Harlow is the perfect pre- or post-workout drink. Try it for yourself at drinkharlow.com.
Have you ever had to put your plans on hold due to symptoms of generalized myasthenia gravis, or GMG? Like taking that weekend trip, talking with friends, or enjoying a meal. Learn about a treatment option that may help. Visit treatgmg.com to learn more. That's treatgmg.com.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn more about each episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you have a couple of options. You can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/PGMH, or consider subscribing to the podcast for only £2 per month and get ad-free listening and bonus content. You can find links for both on our Facebook and Twitter accounts.
Sounds great, doesn't it?